All right, it's top of the hour. A very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us today for this session on L&D trends that will make a mark in 2022, brought to you by SHRM in partnership with UpsideLMS. I'm Natya Vijay Kumar from the Knowledge and Advisory at SHRM and your host for today. Audience, please note that this session is coming to you as a webcast, and hence we have disabled the audio and video. However, this should not deter you from asking your questions through chat, and as your host, I will get as many answered by the panel for you as possible. 2022 has started with a lot of buzzing streets with traffic and workplaces with employees, as companies look ahead to life post the pandemic, or life during the pandemic as we know it. In 2021, if we have learned anything, it is that hybrid working is likely to be the future of workplace for a very, very long time to come. With the flexibility, the hybrid workplace lens, it is fast becoming the preferred choice for many employees. A study indeed pointed out that 40% of employees will most probably work at least part of the time remotely after the pandemic, in contrast to just a mere 28% of employees who did so before the pandemic. What does this mean? This means that L&D will have to continue to focus on not only different areas or different learnings for hybrid workforce, but they will have to pick an eclectic bouquet of options that leverage the strengths of each different mode. This includes mobile, multimedia, just-in-time, and so on. The focus always being maximizing employee engagement. But in the age of plenty, it is critical to decide on our focus areas that will create maximum impact. It is my pleasure to invite leaders who are at the helm of tracking the learning trends to deliver maximum impact for their employees. I'm happy to welcome Mr. Harpreet Chaman, SVP and Head L&D, Sales and Distribution Training, HDFC Ergo General Insurance. We also have with us Mr. Amit Gautam, Founder and CEO, UpsideLMS. Also joining us is Mr. Saurabh Badwa, Senior Vice President, Organizational Learning, Kotak Mahindra Bank. A very warm welcome to all of you today. Before we get started on our discussion, I think we'll quickly try and get to understand what our audience feel about this entire learning. They've done so much of learning virtually. They've sat through possibly innumerable hours of webinars. So let's do a quick dipstick to understand what do they really feel about learning and how would they want to learn. So audience, just pull out your mobile phones and very quickly, if you could log on to www.menti.com and use the code 4493-4390. Please go to www.menti.com and use the code 4493-4390 to tell us, along with work, how much time would you really want to spend on learning in a week? Okay. All right, that's some mixed responses as we are seeing on the screen. Okay, so, all right, we see about 2 to 4 hours a week being the most likely choice for most people here in the audience. As those responses flow in, let me quickly ask our panelists here. Harpreet, Aman, Amit, and Saurabh, any surprises? What has your experience been, while designing learning courses for your employees? Yes, Harpreet.
So no surprises here. I think this is something that we've been observing over a period of time, and these are the learners who are talking about it, because typically half a day a week is about 2 days in a month is what we are looking at, which typically we can definitely talk about structured and unstructured learning. There are certain things that we would definitely define for people to attend, but there will be a lot of things that they'll be learning on the job through their mentors as well. So I think no surprises here.
Right. Okay, keen to hear. Amit, Saurabh?
Yeah, so Nitya, absolutely. I'm not surprised here as well. What would be interested for me to know that how much of it is what people want to learn vis-a-vis people have to learn, because a lot of it is pushed by the organization. A lot of it is what people choose to learn for themselves. So that would be an interesting insight if I would really want to know from people there.
Absolutely. I have made a note of that. So audience, be ready with an answer. Maybe we will bring that up on the Mentimeter shortly. What is it that you really want to know and, learn? Okay, and Manushi Mitra also saying that, self-paced learning will be the choice. So, okay, we hear you, Manushi. All right, so once again, a very warm welcome, gentlemen, to this session on the learning trends that are going to mark 2022. Let me start off, by possibly asking all of you that we've seen different trends, right? We've seen trends where organizations have moved from complete in-person to a completely digital learning. And during the COVID, it was completely about adapting to the digital learning. And of course, organizations really work relentlessly to ensure that everyone is there on that Zoom call, doing the virtual training. There's a lot of adoption in any kind of digital platform. Let me first ask you, Harpreet. So as we are returning back to work, are we really going back to pre-pandemic times in learning too?
So that's an interesting one, because last 2 years, I think it was a learning journey even for the L&D functions in the organization, and a lot of organizations which was primarily doing physical trainings and classroom trainings had to adapt themselves to online learning, and it was probably could be a reason of the mental block as well initially, both from the L&D and also from the learners side, whether they'll be able to adapt to this. But over a period of time, we've been able to see the advantages and the merits of getting into a virtual mode. And today it's an indispensable part of your learning curriculum that you have to be online. The right idea is to look at the blend. What's the blend? Because I'm sure each one of us have experienced while talking to our colleagues, employees, that something that gets missed because of the remote working is the human touch. Yeah. When you talk about transformational learning, it is about getting to learn from each other as well, which typically most of the online learnings and virtual learnings are able to take care of through the virtual classrooms and all. But I'm sure there's a lot of things that gets addressed through one-to-one connect. And therefore, yes, I think pre-pandemic there was the curve was higher on the side of classroom training. During the pandemic it was totally on the digital side. Now the blend probably could be a 60-40 blend, or a 70-30 blend, 70% being probably online training and virtual training, and 30% and learning interventions which are more to do with behavioral and transformational learning, more on human touch and virtual and on the classroom side. Plus, I also feel one of the other aspects which is important in the current times is to ensure that managers also take the role of a learning officer and being coaches. it might sound cliche, but probably more than a luxury, it has become a requirement today to give that human touch to learning. I think the video got frozen, Nitya.
Yeah, I also see her.
Yeah. So maybe what, Amit, what's your view on the new side of learning now after the?
But I think I echo your thoughts in terms of the experiences, because we are at the end of the spectrum where we are able to translate the requirements which companies have into an ecosystem or a learning system which we then offer to our customers.
Yeah.
So the system has to be designed and it has to work accordingly. So we've also seen a huge shift in how things have changed. And of course, let's say pre-pandemic, e-learning was restricted to like maybe SCORM courses or modules or some self-paced learning modules with some assessments built in. And I think the one-day shift from pre-pandemic to post-pandemic, that has resulted in not just e-learning, but full digital learning spectrum being utilized. And yes, the pendulum will swing back till it reaches a stable state. And at a point, we will be where, we'll have a healthy mix of classroom training, a healthy mix of digital training for learning. And I think it also will vary on the industries. If you look at the full ITES industries, I would say the proportion of digital learning will be maybe even 90%, because the gig workforce is highly prevalent over there. In industries like manufacturing, even I think BFSI, the proportion will be higher for classroom training, because if you see even the trends of returning to office, I have been to a few insurance companies, offices, banks. So I see a huge percentage of people coming in offices, and even with mandates, nobody is complaining that we don't want to come to office, and offices are full. But if I go to an IT or ITES office, they're primarily half vacant, which means that is, and it's going to stay like that. So I think the percentage may change and vary from industry to industry. But yes, there will be a return of the classroom mode of learning in some way. Of course, what has now become more prevalent is, like using the virtual classroom tools with instructor who are trained, and that is the key part. We have to now train our instructors also to be able to handle digital medium. How do they conduct trainings virtually? Because that is a huge gap right now. And it is not just presenting a PPT like we used to do in classroom. It is much more. You have to engage with the audience, and like Nitya did a Mentimeter poll. It's a quick tool, but it helps to create some sort of bond and connect with the audience. But yes, the other thing we have seen is companies are now trying to leverage the full potential of digital learning. They are going beyond e-learning and classroom training and virtual classroom training, to even variables or AR, VR. At least they're trying and understanding what it is all about, if they can use it. I think that I would say is a very healthy trend. It takes years to build those trends and habits, but I think it's in the right direction in my perspective.
Right. No, very clearly, thank you so much for those views, Harpreet and Amit. And very clearly what I'm hearing is, yes, we as learners, everyone is looking at differentiated experience. So it's up to the organizations to ensure that, we are, capturing and tapping every, method of learning that is possible to keep the engagement going. But Amit, as we are with you, I'm very keen to understand, last 2 years, we've heard enough and more about, digital learning, e-learning, and, sometimes these terms are used interchangeably. Sometimes it can be quite confusing. So for the benefit of one and all, and possibly for the last time, let us hear it. What is the difference between digital learning and e-learning in itself? How are these two classified, or are they just used interchangeably?
So I think it's conventionally, e-learning has been used to denote or signify or mean self-paced learning modules built on the base of SCORM or AICC protocols. They're like self-running modules which have an assessment built in, and they will usually deploy on an LMS because they need an LMS to run. And of course, it's like we use words like Xerox. We use them to, we use that word as even it's a private word, we use it for photocopying in journal. So I think e-learning maybe in some time might encompass digital learning, but I have seen a lot of discussions. I've seen there's still the understanding is different with each person. I would say digital learning is, typically everything which can be done on a computer or on a digital device. It could be a mobile phone, tablet, a wearable, a smart glasses, or the AR/VR headset, whatever. It could be as simple as a joystick with a TV machine on. And e-learning traditionally has been used to mean the self-paced learning modules designed using SCORM or EICC or even maybe XAPI protocols. But I think that the difference will keep blurring, because for a user it does not make a big difference as long as it is delivered to them through a device which they can use easily. So that's
Right.
I would say.
Right. And I think that, yeah, sorry.
Amit, do I hear you say that e-learning is more to do with the digital content, and the digital learning is more to do with the device or the platform that you use it?
I think that is a very good way of putting it, because then it differentiates the content from the delivery medium. If you look at the medium, every digital medium would mean digital learning. E-learning is typically and traditionally, it might have changed its meaning, but traditionally it is used for the content designed using this SCORM EICC product. I think that's a smart way to look at it.
Great. So, Saurabh, you are someone who has done enough and more, trainings. You have done trainings at large scale for your, in your organizations. So, how do you really go about designing these learning interventions, especially keeping employee engagement in mind? From your experience, what has really worked well for your audience? And as we were talking, there are enough and more types, right? I mean, there's this micro learning, there is learning by applying, there is just-in-time learning. What do you really think has worked for different levels for you in your experience?
So Nitya, there are a few things that I would want to bring in here. That gone are the days that the learning was seen as one size fit all. So we would look at people taking up learning because they're part of an organization, but we see learning needs emerging out of different contours. One of the contours is the need of the role. When I say need of the role, anything and everything I need to learn to be successful in the role is need of the role. There's something called as need of the hour. For example, there's sudden regulatory changes, and then or the pandemic happened and you need to train people to be effective virtually. It's need of the hour for me. Then there's a need of the organization. Need of the organization is more to do with what will help you belong to the organization and represent an organization, or what is the regulatory aspects that you should be knowing, or a cultural aspects that you should be knowing as need of the organization. But the biggest one today is need of the individual. That's where the real personalization happens. Need of the individual is to do with where do I stand today in terms of my performance? What are the behavioral challenges or the gaps that I have? And what are the learning aspirations do I have? And that is where the large scale interventions many a times fail, because they don't address the last part of it, which is the need of the individual. Now, technology plays a very critical role in that, because that helps you, one, identify the gaps there, and also understand the aspirations and democratize learning, if you can, for people to choose the way they want to learn. Today, people in the digital era has an option to learn the way they want to, at the time they want to, and at their convenience completely. So they have an options of podcasts, they have an options of formal e-learning courses, they have an options of bite size, they have an options of instructor-led learning. While you devise a large-scale interventions, it's important that you keep all these things in line, in mind, while you are looking at all the four spectrums of learning, and how do people want to learn, and how can you democratize learning and help people learn and choose the learning that they wish to do, and how they want to do it, and when they want to do it.
So that's a very interesting point, Saurabh. But if you have to think about it, we also say that most of the learning is done by actual application, actually doing. So when you're observing the virtual learning mode, how do you ensure that these participants or employees have some concrete takeaways and they are actually applying? Do you track that as well? And is this really feasible at such a large scale?
Honestly, if you own it centrally, everything, and I completely agree with Harpreet, what he said a few minutes ago, is that where does the accountability of learning lies? Is it with the learning team, or is it with the learner, or is it with the manager? The accountability has to be owned up jointly by everyone. That is where it comes to. So there's a difference between knowing and doing gap. Knowing part of it is definitely can be addressed by the central team, learning team to them. But doing part, obviously you need to have ownership transferred to the individual and to the manager to work along with them. So that's where this thing can work. And I feel that one of the greatest thing that has worked in the pandemic is all this while pre-pandemic, you were focusing on the role holder, that you work with the role holder, support him. You've realized that manager now plays a critical role in bridging the knowing doing gap. Where you bring in manager in aligning things, understanding what the learner is going through, and what is the role of a manager in driving the application of learning. The moment you make it clear, and that too digitally, because you can do it, you can't have all the managers be called and you do that and alignment. But today you've realized all these things already existed. But now with that, technology allows you to do that and do a webinar and help people understand and make the transfer the accountability. That's where you bring the knowing doing gap and possibly drive the application of learning too.
Thank you, Saurabh. And one of our audience, Srinivas, definitely echoes your thought completely. He says, "Superb, Saurabh, very well said. It is the supervisor who should be responsible." So thank you for that. Harpreet, I'm going to hop back to you to understand that what has your experience been? Has it been different, especially when we're talking about a very large feet on street kind of a population? It becomes very difficult to actually track the learning, and learning should dovetail into their everyday work. So what are some of the challenges that you have faced at this level or some other levels typically when you're trying to disseminate learning for them? Or what is it that has really clicked for this level that you've done?
Sure. I think the whole transition or transformation for us also started with understanding the basics. I mean, keeping it simplified is the key. So when we talk about learning, typically these words are interchangeably used, learning and training. When we give a lot of focus about understanding these words, you get the answer. Training is what you do, learning is what people do. You can plan a lot of training for people, whether learning is happening or not is a participant choice. So when you actually talk about learning, you have to be learner centric. You'll have to understand how they are learning, what is their learning need, whether they're learning or only getting trained. As Saurabh also sometime back talked about, is it forced training that people are attending or people are actually learning? It is like we go back to our home and we look at our kids having the book in hand. We don't know whether they are learning or reading. So learning is a very conscious process. People willingly will have to take learning up. So when you talk about learning, for any organization at any level, learning is happening every time, every day, every minute. People are learning something, probably through observation, probably through their reflections, realizations, or through a structured learning track or a training track. So learning is happening. So for an organization, it is important to ensure that people learn what we want them to learn, or what we understand the role requires to be learned, so that they are not learning certain things which are not required. And that's how you create a learning structure, because you want people to learn in a particular way. When you talk about a sales process as well, individuals have their own sales approaches, but every organization would want to promote or have an approach that they do well. So when you talk about learning as a process, yes, there were challenges for us also, being a large organization, and also ensuring whether we are giving training or people are learning. And therefore, this whole idea of managers taking the accountability was important. Managers becoming coaches for on-the-job training becomes important, because we were also losing on the human touch when you are going remotely. So that when you do a lot of intervention, so therefore a blend of entire learning, you do certain sessions either through e-learning or virtual classrooms, but once it goes back to implementing the learning on the ground, it becomes the individuals and the managers' responsibility to create that ecosystem where you get opportunity to apply the learning as well. Because if you're not getting the opportunity to apply those learnings, this is only in your head. Yeah, once you apply the learning, you understand what are the nuances of it. And therefore, what we were able to, as an organization, greatly achieve was all the branch managers for us in a particular business were also TTTized to become trainers for certain interventions on a monthly basis. So you'll always have a limited bandwidth of trainers, and therefore a lot of things that you want to do, even classroom or work at a physical level, you need more hands. So all our branch managers and at a particular level, senior people became trainers. On a monthly basis, they are conducting trainers for our agent advisors and also for our employees, as good as trainers as well. One, it gives you a small cohort to manage, therefore the engagement is more. Second, they understand the ground nuances of wire. And third, as we said, one size doesn't fit all. Therefore, every branch will have their own challenges and things to be taken care of. These people are able to address those situations clearly. And we definitely see a huge upside on this, that the engagement levels are high, the productivities are going up, and we are able to engage more people through a blend of digital and classroom learning.
No, very, very interesting. And Manushi also completely agrees with you, Harpreet. She says that, yes, the learners, it's the learner's responsibility, in fact, to decide whether they want to really learn, or is it just going to be another, session for them. And rightfully so, right, as we are moving. And I think more and more this is becoming very apparent that people with learning agility, higher learning agility, and the constant need to understand and know newer things are always going to be in demand. So somewhere or the other, I think the environment itself has placed the responsibility on the learner to learn newer things and to be ahead of the curve. Amit, you have, of course, worked with multiple such organizations with, different requirements. Let me move away from corporates and also talk about economies, like, for example, with, this entire worker and workplace evolving so rapidly. How do you envisage learning when it comes to gig economy? There's a huge gig economy which is opening up. A lot of organizations are exploring part-timers and, people coming in only for projects. So how do you see this space evolving, and where do you see, the digital learning supporting this gig economy?
Sure. I think, see, this is, something which is closer to our, my company also. In the last, I think, 6 to 7 months, we've hired at least 5 to 6% of our workforce is now people on consultant or freelance or part-time role. And they were hired to fulfill a special project need for 6 months or a year. And even though we make all the right processes to find the right talent, they will never be ready to work in our culture from day zero, right? So they have to be, kind of brought into that environment. They need either some training exercises, they need some understanding of what we do. And even with all the right tools and skills they bring, they would still need to understand the exact project and the specifics of that. So I think what we have realized is, and this is something we've seen in some of the other companies, that is not really a very prevalent, because I think in companies like HDFC or the banks like Kotak Bank, the workforce, while it is not on the payroll, it is still linked to the bank in a very strong manner. They do not, while of course the attrition may be high in some cases, but they're not typically part-time or gig workforce. They're there for full time, may not be there for long time, but they're for full time. So for them, managing learning and training is a little easier. But for, I think, gig workforce, the focus has to be on the short-term effectiveness of what the project is, and then accordingly, define the learning interventions for that either team or person. It is not easy because depending on the duration of the entire engagement, it is not very easy because the commercials are very different for a gig workforce or a part-time workforce. The expectations of the company are also different. They are expecting the person to bring a lot of skills to the table, and hence they kind of hired them. But what I've seen is there are companies who are now trying to create ecosystems where they're able to cater to their payroll staff, their non-payroll staff, but full-time, but not on payroll, and then gig workforce. And they are trying to unify the learning, because eventually the output of even a gig workforce or a part-time person is going to affect the output of the entire team in some way or the other. So it is, I think that the unification of the learning processes across all the teams, be it full-time or part-time, is what I have seen happening recently in the companies. Of course, not to that level, but it is happening. There is an induction program even for 6 months consultant. There's a 1 week induction program on various activities, be it technical, non-technical, even communication skills, multiple things.
Right, right. Any thoughts on that? Thanks, Amit, for that. Saurabh and Harpreet, any thoughts to talk on how is this gig economy impacting, possibly fixed time roles?
I think now is people are moving towards to pursue their passions now, rather than looking at the fixed time, full-time employment that way. So that's an opportunity. And now you would see that at the same time, because they are taking charge of their careers in their own hands, they are also taking charge of their own learning and development in their own hands too. And that's where the role that a team has to play is very different than what they had to play earlier. So it's a true enabler role that you need to play in that. And that's where the shift has to happen in the minds of the HR and L&D professionals too.
Absolutely. Well said on that. Okay, so let's hear from our audience on another question that I have on Mentimeter. I hope the screen is visible, and I'm just keen to hear from you all. If you can just go on to your Menti site, which is www.menti.com, and use the code 44934390. And please help us know that how can organizations help employee maintain continuity in learning? We heard from you on how many hours you like to invest, but what do you expect? Okay, there you have it, Saurabh. Relevant learning. It's www.menti.com and use the code 44934390. Yes, absolutely. I think relevant learning is the key. Anytime, anywhere access. Superb. This is what I always used to wonder. Give them the platform to apply the learning. Okay. Learning advisory. I wonder what you mean by learning advisory. Would love to hear more on what is learning advisory. Do you mean that someone who can curate these learnings for you so that it's easier for you to understand what is relevant to learn? Bite-sized information, implementation. Again, we come to application. We have been hearing application quite a bit. Online, offline, and team building activities. Yes, that's something that we've missed terribly in the last 2 years. Definitely a lot of opportunities to collaborate is what we will look at. Simulation-based learning, yeah. Align with IDPs. Interesting. Right blend and flexibility. Socialize learning. Give feedback. I think, yes, that's one point that we will pick up on. Okay. So as responses keep flowing in, let me ask Harpreet. Harpreet, just building this feedback into this entire, learning journey becomes very important. How do you think we can make this most impactful and relevant? Are all learning journeys supplemented with a feedback?
When we talk about feedbacks or understanding, how do you make your learning more effective? I think what is important to understand is that you create, like somebody also mentioned in this poll, that it is important to create the ecosystem for application of learning. Because, I mean, a simple analogy could be that going to the doctor when you are ill, going to the doctor is not the cure. Taking the treatment for a long time and whatever medicines and that they have said, taking that is the cure. I mean, so attending a training program is not learning. I mean, going back, applying the learning and see results, and therefore taking feedbacks, what's working for you, what's not working for you, if it requires tweaking, if it requires role based intervention, or if it requires certain individuals to have one-to-one coaching or a mentoring session, that gives you the cure, because it would not be one size fit all, and therefore you'll have to get into understand specific roles and then deliver something. But the whole idea about making learning effective is about implementation of the learning. You create those structures and frameworks where you are ensuring that when people go back, they apply learning as well. And therefore the manager's role in the entire process for me becomes very important, because if people go back from a learning or a training session and start doing whatever they were doing earlier and continue to do the same old approach, and nobody asking the question that what did you learn, what are you doing differently from the learning, it's not going to give you continuity and also results. And therefore it requires the entire ecosystem to be aligned together to make sure that the learning is getting implemented and you are getting results for it. And therefore which requires a continuous feedback system as well from the participants also and from their managers also, whether whatever they have learned is actually giving you results or not, or whether it requires some other level of intervention, whether it requires some more intervention for specific individuals who are able to do well or not, because each learner will have their different learning needs. Somebody would understand and will be implement to do certain things in a short span of time, while other might need some more interventions and practice sessions. And therefore this formal informal feedbacks are important. And typically in my experience, informal feedbacks are also very important in the overall process, because typically in a formal feedback structure, people tell you what they actually want, but when you talk to each other, when you understand whether it's working on the ground or not, you actually get the crux of what's not working for you. And these are the things that you'll be able to place well, which requires a collaboration with the functions, collaboration with the participants, giving them a psychological safety in terms of sharing what they really feel about the learning process, whether they don't like the entire learning, then when they want something else. If they have that clarity in mind that they can share openly about what is it that's actually working for them, is the time you can actually make your overall learning model more robust. Otherwise, it is only at the top when people think that these are the things that we want people to learn, but it's not giving results on the ground. And therefore, a continuous feedback system, formal, informal, both. That's the key.
No, and thank you so much for bringing out that point of informal feedbacks also. Sometimes I think in the entire endeavor of trying to make this extremely formal and make this most productive, just blocking times of relevant people becomes a big challenge in this day and age. So those informal feedback things that you mentioned was very interesting. Also, I have seen some organizations beautifully build in social learning also in a way of feedback. So for example, there could be some group activity, where people learn from each other's mistakes. Like, there's a lot of vicarious learning that can happen, and feedback in a way without actually, giving feedback. So for example, group role plays or, such kind of sessions are also very effective to hand out feedbacks. Any top of the mind thoughts on the feedback aspect, Saurabh?
I believe, the learning designs and the learning structure has to constantly evolve. It's not that something that is there, it remains there forever. And it always gets evolved with when you start listening to people and listening to the feedbacks that you get. While we demonstrate, while we reward and recognize learning agility in learners, there's a different agility required to evolve the program designs and the content too. That's the agility required at the learning front, which is many a times underrated. But that's because as much as any product in life has its own life cycle, unless and until you evolve the program design and make it relevant to the current times, because things also change. What was applicable pre-pandemic in sales has become very different post-pandemic in sales. Suddenly the need for empathy has become very, very high, that when you go out and connect with customers on virtual platforms, that is where the evolution of the program designs, content, delivery has to evolve over a period of time. Only if you are looking at and listening to people, you will be able to do that. A lot of times, so I have seen people, biggest challenge at this point of time is when you say a feedback, people realize that we need to, the organization jumped onto the idea of let's build capability in our trainers to be able to deliver programs virtually, not looking at how the lives of the role holders have changed in the virtual environment. The content also needs to undergo a change basis that feedback. It's only an example that I'm sharing it with you. That's a limited lens sometimes people bring in, that the change has to happen at two sides. One is the way you deliver it, but also bring in the real life simulations, what is happening right now, and listen to them as well. That's where the feedback needs to, incorporate an evolution of designs has to happen.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's definitely always a two-way street. It cannot be otherwise at all. Very important point that you brought on the table. And I also see on this, page, a lot of interesting ideas to make this, make the learning in itself pretty motivating. Like, of course, we hear some saying that, link learning with appraisals and help learners see what is in it for them and how they can apply the learning. And, definitely call out, how learners can be supported on the digital platform. So Amit, let me come to you. So many of these things that we have heard about talks about repetitive tasks, talks about scalability, so on and so forth. So what is your experience been? How has a platform per se helped in tying all these loose ends together?
So I think as between Saurabh mentioned that, and I think Mr. Harpreet also mentioned once, the digital technology is now helping to put together all of these things in an easy manner. See, the first role of any technology is to make it easy and efficient. Like you spend 2 hours doing something, make it happen in 5 minutes. The second is, which is the challenging one, is how to make it effective. Now, the effectiveness lies more on the people who are using the technology and less on the technology itself. But it is also important for the technology to evolve to a point where it is matching the needs of today and also anticipate the needs of tomorrow. So like, when we interact with the leaders of the industry in various forums or individually, what we also get to hear is not what they need today, which could be a reflection of what has happened in the last 2 years or 1 year. Also, we have to also be able to anticipate, okay, if this is what we need today, and these things are not going to change in the next 5 years, and they may become different in the next 5 years, how does technology make it better as we move forward? And I think what we have seen is there is a different focus. When it's a different, it used to be there, but a different kind of focus on how learners use technology, especially for learning, in the last, at least 2 years. Almost all the companies we have worked with or talked to, they spend a lot of time now talking to us about how the learners will consume the technology, how easy it is for them to use it, and as both of them mentioned, how democratic it makes it for them. Can they find the right content, find the right learning? I think Saurabh mentioned, can they find the right mix of learning? Can I do this on the podcast? Can I do this via video? Can I do this? Of course, it also depends on how much content has been put in the system. That also then depends on intervention designed by the teams. Are they able to replicate content in podcasts and videos and e-learning and social learning mode? But I think technology plays a very vital role in replicating the needs in a manner where it's easy for the learners to use, easy for the managers to, even if they have to work with the learners as coaches or mentors or just tracker, help them as in on-demand guides. And then, of course, the learning teams to be able to define a full path, because there are now 3 or 4 things happening in the companies now. Initially, there used to be a training calendar, and that was the end of it, right? Of course, it was comprehensive. If you look at somebody like both of these companies scale, it used to be, of course, broken down into branches, locations, areas, roles. But today, that is not just a calendar. It is a network of needs. What does even individual level, define, things are defined there. So I think what we have seen is a huge shift in the need from the technology. Initially, we used to be a management system. Okay, can we track? Can we put everything there and deliver to the people? Today it is, how do learners use it? So I think that's a huge shift. And of course, we continue to work in that manner. We learn from that. Our technologies become different and better in that sense. So today, using a virtual classroom tool is no more good to have thing. It is the most default thing now. Companies may have a system which does not have classroom training, but they cannot have a system which does not have virtual classroom built in.
Yeah.
That's the kind of shift we have seen so far. And of course, mobile-based training, on the on-demand learning. performance support, or access to guides and mentors and coaches. Can all of this happen through a single ecosystem? That is what the need is today.
Right. Thank you so much, Amit. Let me ask the most critical, question. Of course, we've been going around trying to analyze how the learning environment is, how the learners themselves have changed, and how is it that we are catering to different requirements. But what, according to you, is going to really rule the roost in 2022 when it comes to key learning trends? Harpreet, would love to start from you. What do you think is really going to be there, and what are some of the things that possibly is of the past that we can forget?
Yeah, I think there could be two things. One is what people get trained upon. The second is how people get trained upon. So when you talk about what people get trained upon, there are certain things which have changed for permanent. And like Amit also mentioned, that there are certain things that used to be something that organization would want to do has become the basic. So, for example, as he mentioned about using the virtual classroom. Similarly, when you look at L&D fraternity itself, I mean, doing training through a virtual platform is probably 2 years back. You would say if a trainer knows it is good enough. Today, if he doesn't know it, I mean, it doesn't fit the bill. Yeah, these becomes a permanent different things for the L&D fraternity as well. And therefore, when we look at the future, there will be a lot of people need to be more agile. When you talk about learning, leading change becomes through self or through teams. For the managers, probably is the biggest thing that we have seen during the pandemic, because the more the time teams take to adapt to the change and start performing as per the new requirement, is the differentiator for different organizations. Those organizations which are ready to adapt to change fast will create a differentiation for themselves in the market vis-a-vis organization which is taking some time, exploring certain things, reluctant to say whether changes are required or not. So for individuals, it becomes important, and also for the leaders to lead the change, adapt to the change, look at the positive side, understand what are the nuances and the challenges that will be required, take care of them quickly and move on. Or certain things to become more agile, flexible, look at roles which will be able to move to different, learn different skill sets fast, and start working on different skill sets and take on new roles. I mean, gone would be the days when people are saying that I only do this and this is what my expertise area is, which will still required to be there, but people need to adopt to new things to be able to be relevant all the time. So these are certain things which will be required for people to learn more. When we're talking about technologies and the way people learn, blended, as we said, is the way forward. But keep it short, keep it relevant. People take, as we talk about, a good diet plan, yeah, which says that keep eating during the days after small intervals. Learning goes the same way. Keep learning small bite-sized thing over a period of time rather than too much at one time, and therefore you're not able to digest. I think, and plus making the learning interventions more interesting. We have already seen people, even all the ages, I mean, learning a lot through Instagrams, Facebooks, articles, LinkedIn learning, everything is going well. So people learn what they want to learn if it is available at their disposal. So make the interventions more interesting for people, different modes of learning, either through videos or certain anecdotes or simulations, and people will catch on to the learning. And therefore, probably Amit will also agree with us, the newborn LXPs in the world, AI taking over the learning for the organization is the way forward.
Absolutely. Thank you, Harpreet. Very clearly, I hear that, change is the only thing that is constant. So the sooner we, embrace agility, both in mindsets and in doing, it's going to really help us move, and cover larger ground. Let me come to you, Saurabh. What are some of the things that you think is going to be there in 2022?
Couple of things that I feel are now gone are the times, and I'll just pick it up from what Harpreet said, that we moved away from push-based learning to pull-based learning now.
Correct.
What is that? What is the pull strategy now as an organization that you're adopting people to take up? And as he rightly put it up, that people want to shift careers. They see the opportunity as acquiring new skills, how can you enable this through different platforms, technology as a L&D specialist, and be able to provide that ecosystem for a learner is very, very important. And that's where a pull strategy comes in. Not just pushing them through to learn something because the organization wants them to, but that the individual wants to learn. So that's one. Number two, I think the new ways of blended learning has emerged. Before pandemic was all the journey learning was moved away from event-based learning to a journey-based learning even pre-pandemic. So there was the blended way of learning was a instructor-led classroom plus the digital learning, but digital adoption was always a challenge. The pandemic helped in accelerating the digital way, by the way. So if you see that the way it's been accelerated, all these, for example, all these Zoom platforms and Microsoft platforms and Teams, etc., existed even a decade ago, but nobody was using it. So pandemic only did that. And now the new blended way of learning is where you have parts of it as instructor-led classroom. There's a parts of it as self-paced. That's part of it also as virtual. So now it's a more robust learning journeys that you can create with incorporating all these components. And that becomes very, very useful for people also to personalize it in a way, the way you can. And I think also a big shift has happened post-pandemic is that a formal long duration learning, as Harpreet rightly said, the frequency of learning has increased and the duration at one go has reduced drastically. So for example, you will no more see 4 days of classroom training anymore, but you would always do 4 days classroom training instead of you would do half a day every 15 days with these people. So the frequency has gone up. So learning has also started acting as an engagement to people as well. In 2022, you would see that people see that that's the way to engage in the hybrid environment, because it's the need to learn is high, and that's where you can help people grow intellectually and acquire new skills and the constant changing times, what Harpreet said.
Thank you, Saurabh. Some very, very interesting points that we brought out. Definitely, individual needs come right up there. But as you so beautifully said, frequency of learning has increased while the duration has reduced. I think that's very important point. And going back to Harpreet's analogy, when it comes to a diet plan, I think a plate, a little bit of everything is what is going to work. There is no one, set of tools. So we need those ILTs, we know those self-paced, we need those simulations, we need, different aspects on our plate, going good. All right. In the interest of time, while I very quickly bring in Amit, you have seen trends. So let's hear from you. What is it that you think is in store for 2022 for L&D trends? And then we will very quickly take up some very interesting questions that have come up on the chat.
So I think 3 things I will definitely mention. One is, of course, I think increasingly what all of this summarizes, in my opinion, is that L&D teams and businesses as a whole, they have to answer a new question, which is now, why do we need to learn this on a very constant basis? And the answer to that question will lead us to, either micro learning or bite-sized learning, or because the second part of that is that everybody is now going through a digital, kind of a explosion, which means learning, which is also digital, has to compete with everything else which is digital. So it is not possible to just consume a big chunk of your day or a working time in a month or so to just learning. Earlier, learning was like a break away from work. You go to a workshop, you have good hospitality over there. It used to be a nice, break from your humdrum of your daily work, and then you learn something and come back. People were refreshed when they come back. Today, you're mixing everything with the learning and learning with everything. It's very difficult. I think what Harpreet and Saurabh said is what is actually happening because the result of this is that you cannot any longer just bombard people with that, okay, you do these 10 things in the next 3 months. It's not possible. You have to reason out with them. You tell them why this is important for you and the company, and then align them all in one single, a piece. And I think, what I think, and I'll just give an example is, if you see some countries in the world, and you drive there, you see even there is no signal, just a board saying stop, and you stop there where there's no police over there. That is the end objective of where learning has to go. Self-discipline and learning is where we need to all reach. And that cannot happen by constant push. It has to evolve through generations, or through workforce generations. So we have to inculcate that practice and habit of learning. And for that, businesses have to keep questioning the learners, and question their impact of learning on the performance and habit system. But I think in terms of delivery and medium, yes, we will have to design smaller interventions, more powerful, more impactful, and constantly, allow learners to be able to access all of those through a variety of devices and media.
Super. Thank you, Amit. Well summarized that was. Let us quickly jump to some questions that we have here on the chat. And one such question is, what tools can we use to measure the level of learning a participant has got? Anyone can take a stab at it. Harpreet, would you want to? What tools can we use to measure the level of learning a participant has got?
I think one of the tools, as we discussed some time back, was feedback as a tool, formal, informal ways of understanding what people are doing. Second tool is creating the entire ecosystem of learning along with the reporting manager. I think reporting manager is the most important tool in the entire process, because when you talk about the feedback as well, end of the day, the performance is getting evaluated by the manager, and whether what you're doing is effective or not.
Absolutely.
In an structure, the manager is going to say effective or not. So let manager be a part of the entire evaluation process, and that becomes a tool for you to constantly be in touch. All three be in touch: the facilitator, the learner, and the manager, constantly reviewing the overall process and the progress of learning, and seeing whether it is working well for them or not. And even if it requires some tweaking, it can definitely be done. So regular reviews, formal, informal feedbacks could be great tools for making the learning effective. Plus, on the blended side and the digital side, we have already seen that once, if the shift is moving towards digital more, and you have to look at different tools of making learning effective, I think doing simulation based learning can also becomes, which creates a virtual environment for you to test on certain things on the ground and see whether it is giving you results or not, is another tool for you to understand. Plus, it also gives you an understanding about how a learner is able to apply certain things on the ground or not. Simulation-based training also gives you a feedback at that point of time of all the individuals taking different approaches on the similar case.
Absolutely. So Harpreet, what I very clearly hear you say is look at those areas where you can actually see the application of the learning, and that is where you will get the proof of the pudding. It could be from the managers, it could be through simulated environments. So when you start to track actual application of learning, I think that's where the key lies. Moving ahead, Saurabh, I'll jump to you for this one. So Manushi wants to know that how long the impact of learning exists in the mind of a learner.
It's all about sustaining. How long can you sustain the learning? So as we started with saying about learning journeys, we moved away from event-based learning to a journey-based learning. Are you creating an ecosystem of learning where learning is sustained for a long time? And learning is sustained only when you constantly, number one, reinforce the learning. Number two, transfer the ownership of learning to manager and business to do that and create accountabilities. And number three, how do you reward learning agility in learners? These are three things that helps learning sustain it with learners for a long period of time. And that has worked for us. So if you are looking at as an event-based learning, of course, that doesn't last for long. You need to look at using all these three together to be able to learning to be sustained.
Right. Thank you, Saurabh. I think that's, again, very critical. Creating a culture of learning, and everywhere they move, there has to be an opportunity to learn. And that's the kind of environment where learning can thrive and learners can thrive as well.
But Amit, let me add one point to that, is that how do you identify the torch bearers in people, and which are actually the key influencers, and create a belief around where are your success stories of people who've achieved success through learning. If you have an examples of that would help you create the confidence in the larger community of learners that this can help them. That's where the real one of the key success lies. Who are your torch bearers that way? And
right. Identify the champions, the learning champions who will build a case for you. And I'm sure every organization has one, because that's the only way to grow. That's the only way to succeed. Amit, moving to you. One question on how drastically will AI change L&D in an organization, and especially when human touch is crucial in terms of understanding human behavior. How do you think AI is going to really make an impact?
So I think AI is often misunderstood. It is not going to replace human touch at all. The best use of AI will be to eliminate redundancy in all processes and identify only the relevant points where human touch is most effective. It will segregate. So I think what it does is, if you look at a very bigger picture and like a vision, is AI should ideally be able to highlight every individual's micro learning styles, even to the point of a day or a time in the day. On a Wednesday, what would the learner prefer? On a Sunday, how do you make the learning effective for the learner? I mean, that is kind of the depth it can go to, but it will in fact maybe enhance the human touch, because then whatever interactions are happening only for the right reasons at the right time, and both the audience, the recipient, and the human maybe instructor or whatever, the trainer, they are in the right point in time to facilitate that learning in the right manner. So I think AI can really help eliminate redundancy and also fatigue in the system. I mean, that's my view. Because we're running out of time, so it's a short kind of a summary of that. AI is all about data. It just lets you know each other very well. Everybody in the company is small or large. You just identify that person very accurately in just a learning behavior.
Thank you, Amit. I think, yes, really putting AI to use to enable and empower the learners and the larger learning ecosystem is the key to this. All right, in the interest of time, while we have much more to hear from all of you, we will have to call it a day. Thank you so very much. And just to summarize some key takeaways from here, very clearly the focus is going to be on individual needs and making the learning relevant. So it's important for the learners themselves to identify that, what is it that is going to take you to the next level. And the learning ecosystem or the learning L&D teams itself are going to play the role of enablers, how they can really help you move ahead in your learning commitment. We also heard some interesting trends that are going to follow, which is, of course, we heard about how the frequency has increased and duration of learnings have decreased, how we can create a learning ecosystem to make this more continuous and sustainable, and how technology in itself and AI in itself can be used to the advantage of the learner and the organization to empower the learning and making it more relevant, personalized, and continuous for the learners. Thank you so very much for your active participation, audience. And thank you so very much, Harpreet, Saurabh, and Amit, for joining us today and sharing your experience and thoughts with us. Have a very, very good evening.
Thanks a lot,
Nitya.
Nitya.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Pleasure.
Thanks.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. All of you have a good day. Thank you. Bye.